If you take a peaceful scene like this and animate it with people like these, and then mix well with this, the product will be something like this. What to do with the Japanese civilian has always been a tough problem for the Marine Corps. But in the past, the question was, how are we going to get civilians out of our front lines? We had a war on. We had men and tanks who were moving up. We had food and ammunition and hospital jeeps filling the roads. There was little time for the Japanese civilian. Then we discovered we had to find time because they began to stall our attack. They stood in small frightened groups to our front. They gave us a security problem when they were captured. They tied up our transportation. It took MPs, it took food and water, and many times medical corpsmen. The problem was one of military necessity. Well, what did we learn? When the Japanese civilians became too much for us, the first thing we did was to contact the intelligence section. Live enemy personnel, both soldiers and civilians, was their business. And when our zone of attack contained uncaptured civilians, intelligence set up loudspeaker units mounted on jeeps. While we held our fire, interpreters talked to the civilians and bargained for their surrender. We found we could talk a lot of them out this way. It saved us time, and it saved us lives. We had to be careful, though. There might be Japanese soldiers disguised as civilians trying to get behind our lines. We told them to come out in single file, wearing something white so that we could see them easily, and we assured them they would not be harmed. We also warned them against trying to give up at night. Once they were inside our lines, the intelligence officers questioned them, screened out the soldiers, and separated the Koreans and Chamorros from the Japanese civilians. Some of them were questioned about the nature of the combat area and the number of Japanese military that remained, where they were, what weapons they had. In this way, we got a lot of valuable information. We used these methods for the first time at Saipan, and we learned many things about the Japanese people, about their psychology. Most of them would give up if they figured they'd be treated decently. They wanted to live as much as you or I. But they were scared. They were a downtrodden people who had been fed a lot of lies. When they committed suicide, it was mainly out of fear of possible American torture. But when we had the Japanese civilians in our hands, they were docile and gave us no trouble, not even the geisha girls. By the time we got to Tinian, we had our techniques perfected. We used well-known Japanese men and women on the microphones to persuade their countrymen to give up. When the Japanese heard these familiar voices, they surrendered by the hundreds. As soon as we relieved an area of as many civilians as would give up, we prepared it for the entrance of our troops. The transportation problem was partially licked by the establishment of forward internment camps in regimental zones of action. Here, civilians were fed and given medical treatment until trucks were free for the haul back to the permanent civil affairs stockade. At the civil affairs stockade, facilities and personnel were available to maintain order and discipline. Our own food supplies were conserved by the use of captured Japanese supplies. In this respect, our own frontline troops cooperated by reporting caches of Japanese stores. Civilian working parties were sent out to recover the food. Also, Japanese medical personnel were employed to treat the wounded. We learned much from the Marianas Campaign. We learned that fighting on Japanese territory was more than men and ammunition and supplies. We had to reckon with the Japanese civilian. When the Marines landed with the 10th Army at Okinawa 9 months later, we were better equipped for the job. We had more Japanese interpreters, more civil affairs personnel, more loudspeakers, more transportation. And all of our Marines had been instructed in the proper handling of enemy civilians. 80,000 Japanese civilians were rounded up by the 3rd Amphibious Corps in the first 25 days. There was no evidence of any widespread suicides as at Saipan and Tinian. There was another thing that intelligence learned in these campaigns. We found out how important Japanese documents are. These documents told us whom we could trust and whom we could not. They gave us the names of the mayor, the factory superintendent, the police captain, the jailbird. They told us how we could assist in the reconstruction of the Japanese community. Today, with the Marines ashore in Japan, intelligence will again put its knowledge of the Japanese to work. Occupation means more than the landing of troops, the rebuilding of airfields, the establishment of communications. Occupation is mainly concerned with people, the Japanese people. We have to know all about them. We have to know which of these people ran the banks, built the munitions plants, ran the prisons, wrote the editorials. In short, who really pulled the lever that dropped the bombs on Pearl Harbor? And who are the ones who would like to take a stab at it again? That's what the occupation is about. But for the bulk of Marines who walk their post in Japan, who carry their rifles and execute their orders, what's their part in this business? Their part is to understand the role of intelligence, to play ball with the men and officers who are gathering information on the Japanese. We've shown you how intelligence gathered its experience fighting from island to island across the Pacific. Now we ask you to understand its new job. Although many cities of Japan lie twisted and smashed today, it was once a pretty prosperous place. But it was run by the wrong people, who were taught the wrong things and who took the wrong path. The job of occupation troops is not to rebuild, but to boss the new construction, with the facts and figures supplied by intelligence. The individual Marine can cooperate by understanding the intelligence mission, by recognizing the importance of Japanese documents, by preventing looting, and by reporting all suspicious persons and happenings. Intelligence is your key to an efficient occupation and a speedier trip home. Use it.
ます。